Yeah, my name is Peter Johnson. I was born in Mablethorpe in February 1936. So my early recollections of the start of the war are a bit vague. My first recollection of anything is we lived in a bungalow on Repton Road in Mablethorpe, which backed onto the railway line. Now this must have been early one morning because I could only have, it'd probably be about 1942. I was sitting in bed with my mother. She was drinking her cup of tea. My father was out in the lounge, and an enemy bomber came over and dropped bombs all along the railway line behind us. Our ceiling collapsed on top of us, and my father, rather foolishly, was looking out of the window. He heard the aeroplane coming, and it blew all the window in, and he had a great big gash up his arm. Our neighbours was my mother's sister and her family, and their roof fell in on top of them. So obviously we all had to leave, and we all went to live with my grandmother, who lived on Tennyson Road in Mablethorpe. Now, she had a big house, but I can't remember how we all managed to get in, because there were 4 of us and there were 4 in my relations on the other bungalow. So that's my first recollection of the war. So my father was injured, but my mother and I think we were shaken up from what I remember, but we didn't suffer any injuries. And then my next recollection really is my father, before the war, he worked for Billy Butlin, who had amusements at Mablethorpe. But when the war started, of course, they were all closed, and my father went to work as a projectionist at the Victoria Cinema on Victoria Road in Mablethorpe. Now, that one day he was due to show a training film to a load of the troops, because Mablethorpe and Sutton were full of army people, but it was cancelled at the last minute. Now, it was always thought that the Germans had found out about this, because a bomber came over and dropped bombs on Victoria Road, right on top of the cinema. But because the only casualty was a chap who was delivering some fuel oil to the cinema. My father had gone home for lunch. He was killed, the delivery driver. Now, by coincidence, his surname was Johnson. So the rumour went all around the town that my father had been killed, but of course he hadn't. Now, the bomber carried on down Victoria Road, and it was machine gunning all the way down Victoria Road. The Victoria Cinema was destroyed, and quite a few, where the existing library and social club is, they were all destroyed. They were all rebuilt after the war. Now the site is still there, and it's where Gracecroft coaches park their coaches. That's the site of the old Victoria Cinema. And funny enough, I started work at Mablethorpe Council offices in 1952 as an articled pupil to the engineer and surveyor. And I remember in one of the downstairs offices you could see where the wall had been replastered after the machine gun. Obviously the machine gun bullets had gone into the office, and the wooden cycle shed round the back of the offices still had bullet holes in it. I distinctly remember that. So that was my next recollection. And then I think after that occurred, my father obviously was out of work again, and he went to join ENSA, which was the organisation which provided entertainment for the troops. And he was a cinema projectionist, and he worked on camp cinemas on quite a few of the airfields throughout Lincolnshire. He worked at Kelston, Manby, Strubby, and I think that's when my mother and I we went off to live in Derby with one of my mother's sisters. And I went to school there. It was a village called Little Eaton, just outside Derby.
How long were you in school at Derby?
It must have been less than 1 year, I think. Yeah.
Do you feel the war affected your schooling?
Not really, no. I no, we had some good teachers. They were all lady teachers pretty well, yeah, because most of the men were away, fighting. But yeah, I don't think my education suffered. In fact, we had some fun, we had some adventures. But then we must have come back because I remember I went to the junior school in Mablethorpe, and quite often we were taken into the air raid shelters in the playing fields at the back. There was a concrete air raid shelter. I remember quite often being taken back through there. And then quite a few, I remember some of the other black people who were some of the pupils, because all the sand hills were all one complete minefield, and the beach was covered in mines and tank traps. And I distinctly remember quite a few children were killed they kind of got into the minefields and they were blown up, and we were always told never go through the barbed wire, but some of them, being children, did. I remember there was a big army camp at the north end of Mablethorpe, which is now where the seal sanctuary is. And we used to go, one or two of us lads used to go down there hanging around. We used to trying to collect cap badges. And so we used to go down and we'd scrounge a bit of food out the canteen. And the Imperial, the Dolphin Fish and Chip shop in Sutton, that used to be the Imperial Ballroom. And that was also taken over by the army. And we used to come and hang around there trying to catch cap badges off the soldiers. Yeah, so it was quite we were never terrified of anything, rather enjoyed it all really. We had quite a few evacuees who were at school with us, people who'd been brought up from London area. And I think one or two of them did in fact stay on after the war. Now, I do remember my father, I think this was when we were living with my grandmother, taking me out one night when it was dark, and I think he said we looked up and there was all these lights, and I think it was the first 1,000 bomber raid that was taking place that we saw that. And then we went to live in Tennyson Avenue at Mablethorpe. Now it must have been 1944 because my sister was alive, but she was only a baby. And then it was one evening, my father was still away, and there was such a terrific explosion. This would be in the evening. Our front door blew in. We all shot in under the Morrison shelter which we had in the front room, my sister and I and my mother, thinking the Germans were bombing us again. Anyway, shortly afterwards, my mother's younger brother turned up. He was a messenger with the ARP, who told us in fact it was a bomber that had got into trouble, and it had landed on the beach fully, and he still had his bomb load on, and it had exploded. And I remember going out the next day into the high street in Mablethorpe, and all the shop windows had been blown in. And I have vague recollections of going up onto the promenade and seeing the wreckage out on the water's edge.